When someone has experienced spiritual manipulation, coercive control in faith communities, whether that is a large church, a faith-based organization, or any other community around faith, it is extremely damaging. It is difficult to navigate. It is confusing. It causes muddiness in the brain and this wrestling internally between wanting to do good things and wanting to please and honor God versus something else being stirred up inside of us that is our gut instinct saying, no, there's something wrong here, and not knowing what to do with it. Today, I am responding in a sense to current information that is happening. It is all over YouTube and I'm sure other places, but it has to do with Daystar and Jonathan Lamb and Suzy Lamb and what is happening with Joni and Jimmy Evans and the leaders in the Daystar meeting. I don't normally like to go into talking about any specific people. That's just not my lane. I love that other people are out there doing these reveals. They are doing the interviews. My lane, my purpose here is to talk to people who have either dealt with spiritual abuse, coercive control personally, or maybe they just don't know. Maybe they care about other people who have suffered from this. Because the reality is there are people filling the churches who have struggled with this in past churches or in their homes, and they may not even know it. When we can identify the patterns of what's happening, we can also be in a place where we can help ourselves and other people. So before I get into this, I'm going to share a little bit of a personal story, and I will be bringing up a few things from the current issue that is present as of this recording. There is a revealing of corruption in powerful places, particularly in the kingdom of God and church leadership, and I'm grateful for that. So my focus here is not about any particular person or issue or crisis or whatever's going on in the news. My purpose here is to identify the patterns and to explore this so that we can become better informed and better equipped to navigate when someone else is being manipulative and to support others who have gone through this, and to reveal what has happened when so much confusion has covered up the fact that it is damaging, that it has been destructive to someone's sense of personhood, to their ability to connect to God. That's my heart, and I hope that's what comes through in this video. The story I'm going to share today that is personal is just going to include highlights. Well over a decade ago, maybe 15 years, I can't even remember exactly the year, but we were involved with a church that was dwindling. There had already been numerous things that were happening in the church that had caused division, that there were different issues, and I'm not going to go into all of that. Eventually, there were maybe 50 some adults left in a congregation that was in the hundreds. At this point, our church had been looking for a new pastor for a long time. They had been on a pastoral search. We had temporary pastors and pastors filling in to preach on Sundays because there was a search on for a full-time pastor. I think it was 2 years in when one of the people who had come in to preach a sermon was apparently going to be the next pastor, even though some of us were on a leadership team, which I thought was about helping to choose who the next pastor would be and to be there as a support for the elder team. We were told that this person was going to come in, do a sermon or a series of sermons. I don't remember if it was 1, 2, or 3. And then we were going to vote that person in. We were told. We were not asked. While this was happening, other things were starting to surface that just didn't make sense. Something was off. And at that time, that's all I knew. Something was off. Several of us in the church, the ones who were left, were all wrestling. Something is off. This doesn't feel right. What is it? We don't know. I wrestled so much with trying to identify and pinpoint why it felt so off, why this just did not seem right. But we were supposed to follow leadership. I had always grown up with you follow authority, you trust and obey, you listen to God and the church leaders, and that's their position, and then you just follow and trust it. Well, God has been raising me up in a new way of looking at trust and obedience for over the last decade through this event and through the ranch and other circumstances that I've walked through in my life, to rise up and recognize that I actually have a voice too, that I can decide what matters and what my values are and what I'm going to do with that. And blindly accepting and blindly following someone in a position of authority is not necessarily honoring to God, nor is it loving God, the people in authority, or the people that are under the authority that we are part of, in this example, the congregation. This makes me think about some of the things that Jonathan might be experiencing as a result of him speaking up. He is being told over and over and over again he's being rebellious. Now, this is set up that it is the premise of the whole conversation that he is in rebellion. I want to pause here for a moment to breathe. Because if you're watching this video, you may have been someone who has experienced spiritual manipulation. You may have been that person who was told you are just being rebellious when you actually had a different opinion, when you desperately needed to be heard, when you couldn't figure out what words to say, the right words to say, how to say the words, how to get anything out, how to be heard, and you were put in such a condemned one-down position that hearing this could be stirring things up for you right now. If you've listened to those audios, it could be stirring up a lot in your nervous system. And so I want to pause, because it's important that we recognize and honor how our bodies respond when old trauma starts to surface. So if you need to take a break, take a break. For now, I invite you just to notice what's happening and breathe. When I heard Jonathan speak up in the different audios that I've heard so far, I heard someone who was being wise in their word choice, trying to be clear and to stay clear in a conversation, to bring clarity to the audio as well, and someone who was not on the attack and also not shut down. I read somewhere or heard in one of the other videos, people were calling Jonathan weak or something, and I thought, no. That was a very strong place to be in, to be calm, to be asking questions and remaining curious, and to not let his voice be completely shut down. It takes a lot of courage just to face people who are treating you badly. And sometimes we don't need to. We need to step away and we need to walk away. And it is still a lot of courage in someone if they face someone, but they've had a lot of emotional dysregulation that caused them to be reactive or to shut down. They could still be walking in courage to do that. When I heard the calm confidence, I heard someone who was also very conscientious to not explode, to not shut down. And that takes a lot of energy to do. When you consistently have other people telling you you're rebellious, or if you choose this, then you're staying in rebellion, anything along those lines, you are constantly put in a position that you're going to naturally want to self-protect, to defend, because you're in a position where you have to defend whether or not you are being rebellious. That's that natural response would be, no, I'm not, or how could you think I'm being rebellious? It takes a lot of energy and effort to allow them to have their opinion, they stated it, and to stay strong in the truth of how you're operating. What we hear in the audios is a pattern of things that happen that many other people have experienced. The person in authority, but in this place, it's really interesting because Jonathan's actually, I believe, the vice president, if I'm understanding correctly, and he's part of a board of 3 people, but he is not talked to by the president, his mom. He is talked down to by someone else the whole time, and in a very condescending and condemning tone and way of being, and the language that's being used, and just constant presumption that anything that Jonathan says is wrong, and they are on the defense. Part of the pattern that played out included this one down positioning. Someone on the same level positionally in authority on a board, maybe I'm wrong in that, just from what I hear in the audio and the way that I'm understanding and interpreting it, who is talking down, but that whole tone of voice and the mannerism that we hear is a very strong one down position. He called him son. It was condescending as well. Using that position to power over, to use their powerful voice and the dynamic of the meeting to shut down another person's voice, and use God to do it. Leaning on references to God and language about God that is not godly at all to push down this other person. Have you experienced that? If you have, I invite you to breathe again with me. And I am so sorry. It stinks. It is an awful place to be in. In addition to the one down dynamic and the tone of voice that we hear that's carried throughout, and the twisting of words, the way that one thing would be said and then this twisting and distortion of what they're saying, the point of the words becoming what the other person wants it to be. So Jonathan speaking up about the tracker in his car, for example, and Joni jumping in and making the issue about something other than the issue that Jonathan was bringing up. Jonathan was talking about his concern that he's being tracked without his knowledge and other factors that I'm not as aware of. But what I understood in that conversation was that he was not aware of it as the vice president, and that he had concerns that were never talked about because he was immediately shut down and then talked over with this explanation of something that was not relevant to Jonathan's concern. That is twisting of the words. That is twisting the meaning and the message that is happening in the room to fit a narrative, to fit what they wanted it to fit, that he was rebellious and that his perception is wrong. That twisting is so damaging. I just go back to the Garden of Eden, thinking of the enemy seeking to deceive, to distort, to disconnect us from God, to disconnect us from the truth that God says and that God provides, and what is important to God, and to try to get us to think about other things and what's more powerful, what's better, and what's good, and totally distort things to the point that we are now disconnected from God. I feel that in me right now as I think about what happened in this scenario, but this is just an example of spiritual manipulation that happens in so many instances that we do not hear about. Another thing that happened in this manipulation dynamic is disregard for personhood. There is no room for Jonathan to have his own thoughts or questions that are different than the leaders. It was shut down. His personhood, his value as even just a role in the position that he was in, was shut down over and over and over again. There was an utter lack of curiosity that we heard. Now, I am just going based off of the audios that we heard, but there is not a sense of any curiosity for what is the concern, why is the concern there, what makes you concerned in anything. to help to understand where he's coming from. In spiritually manipulative environments, in coercive control, whether it's happening in a church with leadership or in your home, a lack of curiosity, but not just curiosity, honest and genuine curiosity, even frustrated, but honest curiosity that seeks to understand is a flag. To me, that is at least a yellow flag. If there's no curiosity, there is no room for two people to have different opinions, to have a reciprocal relationship, to have mutual give and take. There's no curiosity or willingness to try to understand, to seek to understand the other person and where they're coming from. It is all about authority and power. There is some arguments I think people make that, you just have to listen to authority. You can't have more than one person who has different opinions. And there's times when we have to just have one person who's just making all the decisions. Maybe my mind is limited on this, but what I go to are crisis situations where someone's life is at stake and someone has to make a decision to move out of the way, to, the harm is coming your way and someone shouts duck and everyone listens to duck and they duck and they're saved. In war, when someone is the one who's in command, they're the ones that is watching out for the harm that's coming in. And so they're providing a command to keep other people safe. And it is about the benefit of all. It is not about one person. When one person is deciding what is right and what is wrong for the other person, we're talking about not life-threatening situations where life is at stake in the moment. We are talking about faith communities where we are called to serve, to honor one another. All the one another's of Scripture, love one another, comfort one another, mourn with those who mourn, rejoice with those who rejoice. That is a one anotherness, that is a witness in the church communities. This power over dynamic that demands I am the one that's in control, whether this is happening in the home or in the church communities, is not the Spirit of God. I would argue it is not the Spirit of God. It is a spirit of power and control to dominate. And I do believe a lot of this comes out of people who have, yes, pride is at stake. Pride to me is like a wall and a block to the healing work that needs to be done for the person who's causing harm. The pride says, I am the one who's going to decide. This is, again, going back to the Garden of Eden. I am the one that's determining good and bad. I am good. You are bad. And I'm going to tell you like it is. That is not the Spirit of God. That's not the spirit of life that comes from God. That is a spirit of self-importance and pride, keeping ourselves from connecting to another person. I do believe that a lot of people who misuse power and authority probably have had life events that have caused damage for them, that have gone unhealed. And you mix in the pride factor with that and this inability, this lack of willingness to be changed, to be influenced by someone you think isn't the most powerful, best person to decide this. There's something going on there. That is a self-sourced dynamic that is destructive to yourself and to other people. I have to take a couple of breaths myself because talking about this, one, it brings up memories of different things that I've watched through, including this church dynamic where we eventually brought to leadership that we had concerns, tried to figure out how to voice the concerns. We had a big meeting. There was silence in this particular situation. It was all silence, and it did not end well. I'm going to leave it at that for today. That is all I'm going to share today. However, that dynamic of what you're going to do because you're going to listen to the authority and being in a position where you're supposed to be part of the problem solving and working together to decide how things are going to move going forward in a faith community is something I think a lot of people in the faith have experienced to some degree. And there are so many people who are hurting and have walked away from God, walked away from church, or not walked away from God and just walked away from church because they are wrestling. They're trying to determine who is God really, and what does it mean when people say these spiritual things, because I've only heard them in these terms where somebody in a power used them against me. Now, how can I believe the truth of God's goodness and God's love and good things of God that are hard to wrestle with if they've been used like a hammer to crush my spirit, crush my soul, crush my personhood, and devalue me, which is not of God? I hope that as I explore some of this in the videos, and that as you make space to simply connect with what's happening inside of you, as you notice maybe anxiety that comes up, maybe sadness, maybe anger, I pray that you'll have space to give grace for yourself, to wrestle, and that you will also be able to connect to the core of the real God, the God who loves you, who created you, who designed you, and has a vision for you. I pray that we can treasure that in ourselves and with other people so that we can grow as the body of believers. I think that's all I'm going to say today. And if you have questions, if you want to hear topics, specific topics, let me know. I am actually pulling together a list of different video topics right now and trying to keep them short and clear as I can. But I got to be honest, my brain is kind of lit up with so many thoughts about the current events, about coercive control dynamics and how that's harming individuals and the body of believers, ways that we can grow, ways that we can undo spiritual harm. And I want to provide content that is truly helpful and hopeful to where your nervous system can go and breathe and take a break. That's my prayer today. Take care.